Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can hold is a secret. A secret so deep it claws at your soul, pushing you to the brink of despair. But what happens when that secret unravels in the most unexpected way? What if the very people who hold your future in their hands are strangers you thought you had long since forgotten? If you're feeling the weight of life's uncertainty, hit that like button, subscribe, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, because tonight's story is about a woman who knows the heavy burden of uncertainty and how it can either break you or drive you forward. Now, let's dive in. Adai sat in the sterile, fluorescent-lit waiting room, gripping the crumpled, nearly empty envelope with the last of her savings. $7. That was all she had for her mother's treatment. $7. It seemed like nothing. The paper felt like a heavy stone in her hand, each millimeter a reminder of how far she'd fallen. The smell of antiseptic lingered in the air, but it wasn't enough to mask the sour taste of failure that was creeping up on her throat. She looked across the room, at the nurses hustling past, the doctors speaking in hushed tones, all moving with purpose, while she sat still, a quiet failure among them. Her eyes flicked over to her daughter, Era, sitting across from her, legs swinging from the chair as she fidgeted with her favorite pink hair tie, a bright burst of color in the otherwise gray surroundings. At 10 years old, Era had learned how to be strong. She had learned it from her mother, who wore the weight of the world in silence. But even Era couldn't hide the worry in her eyes, the way her little hands gripped the edge of the chair like she might be swept away at any moment. "Mama," she said softly, her voice breaking the silence, "is Grandma going to be okay?" Adai's heart broke with the question, but she smiled as best she could, brushing a lock of Era's hair behind her ear, the way she always did to offer comfort. "Of course, baby. Grandma is going to be just fine. We just need to get the treatment she needs. It's going to be okay." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but it was a lie she had to tell. If she didn't, what would Era believe? What would she believe? The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly. Every second felt like an eternity, the hands of time mocking her as she thought of the reality that she might have to let go of the one person who had always been there for her, who had fought for her when no one else would, her mother. But how could she fight back now when all she had left was this $7? The truth was, she had no idea how she was going to make it. She had burned through her savings just trying to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. Every extra penny she had went to her mother's medication, but it was never enough. She had worked every overtime shift she could, scrimped and saved every dollar, but the bills always outpaced her. And now, with her mother's health failing fast, she was running out of time. A soft cough from the receptionist's desk snapped her out of her thoughts. Her eyes met the nurse at the counter, who gave her a polite, rehearsed smile, as though she were trying to reassure her that everything would be fine, but Adai could see the pity in the woman's eyes. It wasn't their fault, but it still stung, like 1,000 tiny needles pricking her skin. "Miss Okonkwo," the nurse called. Adai stood up quickly, her knees shaky from the weight of the situation. She adjusted her coat, the fabric thin against the biting cold air of the clinic, and tried to ignore the way her heart pounded in her chest. "Yes, that's me." She stepped toward the counter, Era trailing behind her, clinging to her side. "I'm afraid the doctor is running a bit behind," the nurse said. "It will just be a few more minutes. Is there anything we can get you while you wait?" Adai forced a smile, shaking her head. "No, thank you. We're okay." As she turned back to sit down, a heavy silence settled between them, the kind that only comes from the shared understanding of desperation. Just as she was about to sit, her phone buzzed. At first, she thought it was another bill collector, another demand for something she didn't have, but when she glanced at the screen, her breath caught in her throat. The name on the display made her freeze, Kang Ji-hoon. She hadn't seen his name in years, and the last time she'd heard it, her heart had shattered into pieces. The memory hit her hard, a cold, winter night in London, his voice, promises of love, of a future together, all shattered when he left. The boy she had once known and loved, now a man whose world was far beyond anything she had ever dreamed of. Her fingers trembled as she swiped the screen to answer the call. Hello? Adai's, his voice was deep, almost unrecognizable after so many years. It's Jihune. I need to speak with you. It's urgent. Her pulse quickened. It had been more than a decade since they last spoke, and the space between them had only grown, full of pain and unspoken words. What could he want now? What could he possibly have to say after all this time? Jihune, she said, her voice steady but tight. I don't have time for games. My mother is. I know, he interrupted, his tone softer now. I heard. I've been keeping track. I've arranged for your mother's treatment. I'll cover all the expenses. Everything. It's taken care of. Adai's breath caught, a rush of confusion and disbelief flooding through her. What? Why? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Because he said quietly, I owe you. I owe you everything. The line went silent for a long moment. Adai stared at her phone, her mind whirling. She felt something deep inside, a glimmer of hope, real hope for the first time in months. But it was accompanied by a deep uncertainty. Could she trust him? Could she believe this man, this stranger she once loved, who had walked away from her and their daughter without a word? Why now? She asked, barely able to form the words. He sighed, and she could hear the weight of years in it. Because I've been a coward. And I want to make things right. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I want to help. The room seemed to close in around her. The $7 she had, the bills she couldn't pay, the crushing weight of the world she had been carrying, suddenly, it felt like all of that was slipping away, replaced by something she couldn't quite name. Could this be real? For a long moment, she couldn't speak. The only sound in the room was Era's soft breathing beside her. Then, finally, she managed to say, thank you. The days that followed felt like a strange blur for Adai's. What should have been a moment of relief, a victory of sorts, was clouded by uncertainty. Her mother's treatment was being covered, every cost taken care of, thanks to Jihune. Yet, every time Adai's tried to settle into the comfort of that knowledge, doubt crept back in, darkening the edges of her thoughts. Was it a genuine offer? Or was he simply trying to ease his conscience after all these years? The reality of the situation was dizzying. She had never expected him to reach out, especially not after all this time. But now, sitting in the sterile, white-walled clinic, she couldn't help but feel the weight of his presence hanging in the air, an invisible force she couldn't ignore. Jihune's promise had been swift, decisive, and without question. Within hours of their call, the hospital confirmed that the treatment her mother so desperately needed was fully funded. A miracle, really. But as Adais walked out of the clinic that afternoon, the relief she should have felt was weighed down by another kind of heaviness. It was Era who broke the silence. Mama, who is that man on the phone? Her voice was soft, filled with curiosity. Adais paused, her hand on the door to their apartment. Her thoughts were tangled, unable to separate truth from emotion. Era was still too young to understand all the intricacies of the past, too young to know the pain that came with Jihune's absence from their lives. But soon, she would know. And for the first time in years, Adais found herself afraid of what she might have to tell her daughter. He's someone from the past, Phoebe. Someone who used to be part of our lives. Is he going to help Grandma? Era asked, clearly not understanding the full gravity of the situation. Adais nodded, swallowing hard. Yes, he's going to help. But we have to see if this is for real. Do you think he'll stay? Era asked, her small voice filled with a hope that made Adai's heart ache. Adais wasn't sure how to answer. She wasn't sure about anything anymore. The next morning, Jihune called again. This time, Adais couldn't ignore the tension that had settled in her chest. When she picked up, his voice was calm, measured, almost too calm. Adais, I'd like to meet. In person. To talk about everything. Adais felt her pulse quicken. Of course, it had to come to this. She couldn't keep avoiding him forever. Yet, the thought of facing him, after all these years, brought back a flood of memories, both sweet and bitter. What's this about? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. I want to meet Era, he said simply. And I want to make amends. I've wronged you both, and I need to fix that. Adais closed her eyes. It had always been easier to hate him, easier to believe he had chosen to abandon her and their daughter. But now, after his unexpected generosity, it was impossible to ignore the small flicker of hope stirring inside her, a hope she had long since buried. She hesitated for a moment, then answered, "I'll bring Era. But I'm not promising anything." Ji-hoon agreed, and they set a time for the meeting. The day arrived, and Adai's nerves were taut with anxiety. She hadn't spoken to him in so long, and in the years since he'd walked out of their lives, she had built a fortress around her heart. She couldn't afford to trust him again. Not after everything. They met at a cafe in the heart of the city, a quiet spot that seemed worlds away from the bustling energy outside. Era, in her usual curious way, had immediately begun asking questions about the menu, her small hands flipping through the pages as if she were completely unaware of the weight of the moment. Ji-hoon, dressed in a tailored suit that looked like it was made for someone far more put together than he actually seemed, was already there when they arrived. His posture was stiff, but there was something about the way he looked at Era that made Adai's heart tighten. The resemblance between them was unmistakable. Era's sharp jawline, the same dark eyes, there was no denying it. She was his daughter, just as much as she was hers. "Hello, Era," Ji-hoon said, his voice softer than she remembered. His smile was tentative, almost shy, and for the first time in her life, Adai saw something in him that she hadn't expected: vulnerability. Era, ever the curious one, tilted her head, studying him with wide eyes. "You look like me," she said, matter-of-factly. There was no hesitation in her voice, no uncertainty. She had made the connection immediately. Yes, I suppose I do," Ji-hoon said, a faint chuckle escaping him. His eyes lingered on Era, and for a moment, Adai saw something else in his gaze: regret. It was as if he had just realized how much time had passed, how much he had missed. "So, you're my dad?" Era asked bluntly, her innocence making the question all the more cutting. Adai winced, but said nothing, watching the exchange unfold in front of her. Ji-hoon looked at her, then at Adai, his face unreadable. "Yes," he said quietly. "I'm your father. And I've made many mistakes. But I'm here now. I want to get to know you." Adai's heart tightened at the simplicity of his words. Here he was, asking for a chance, asking for forgiveness, but she knew better than to believe everything at face value. It wasn't that simple. It never had been. And yet, a small part of her wondered if maybe, just maybe, this could be the beginning of something she had long since given up on. "So, why didn't you come before?" Era asked, not backing down, the bluntness of her words surprising both adults. She had the courage to ask what Adai was afraid to. Ji-hoon's expression softened. "I was afraid," he admitted. "I thought I was too young to be a father. I let my family convince me that you and your mother deserved better. But I was wrong. And I'm sorry." The weight of his words hung in the air between them, heavy and thick. For the first time in years, Adai felt a shift in the atmosphere. It was as if the universe had conspired to bring them to this moment, to give her daughter the chance to know the man who should have been there all along. Era, her young eyes full of the same questions that Adai had carried for so long, nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "But you have to prove it. If you're really my dad, you have to show up. No more disappearing." Ji-hoon swallowed hard, his gaze never leaving Era. "I will. I promise." And in that moment, Adai realized that the story she thought she knew, the one she had carried with her for so long, wasn't over. It was just beginning. The days that followed the meeting were filled with uncertainty, yet also a strange sense of possibility. Ji-hoon had kept his word. He showed up, not just in words, but in actions, doing what he could to be part of Era's life, to make amends in the only way he knew how, by simply being there. It wasn't easy, of course. There were moments of hesitation, of silence, and of doubt. Adai couldn't help but wonder if this was just another grand gesture, a fleeting attempt to ease his own conscience. But every time Ji-hoon sat down with Era to talk, to learn about her likes and dislikes, to share stories of his life, she saw something shift in him. And in herself. At first, Adai struggled to reconcile the man sitting before her with the one who had walked away years ago, leaving her alone with their child. But as the weeks passed, and Ji-hoon continued to show up for for her, something began to soften. It was like the first cracks in a wall that had stood firm for so long, protecting her from the hurt of the past. She realized that no matter how much pain he had caused, his efforts now were genuine. He wasn't perfect, but neither was she. They started to build something new, something that wasn't defined by past mistakes or the expectations of others. It wasn't a fairy tale, but it was real. Ji-hoon was there for in ways Adai's had never imagined. From picking her up from school to attending her dance recitals, he became a steady presence in their lives. Slowly, the unspoken tension that had defined their relationship started to ebb away. And though the journey ahead was still uncertain, they began to find their way forward together. But forgiveness wasn't easy. For Adai's, it took time to let go of the anger that had built up over the years. It took time to accept that perhaps, despite the past, there was room for something new. One night, as they sat together at the kitchen table, Ji-hoon turned to her, his voice tentative but filled with sincerity. Adai's, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I'm trying. I'm trying to be the man you both need me to be. I'm sorry it took so long. Adai's didn't reply immediately. Instead, she simply looked at him, her eyes searching for the truth in his words. And after a long silence, she nodded, her heart heavy but full. I don't know what the future holds, Ji-hoon, she said softly. But I know that right now we're here. And that's enough. Who had been listening quietly from the doorway, looked at her mother and father. Does this mean we're a family now? She asked, her voice filled with that innocent hope that only children have. Adai's smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. She reached for Era's hand and pulled her close. It means that we're building something new, she replied. And sometimes, that's the best kind of family you can have. Ji-hoon smiled, his eyes softening as he looked at both of them. I'll be here. No matter what. The days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Their lives began to take on a new rhythm, a quiet understanding between them that, despite the scars of the past, they were moving forward. Ji-hoon continued to make an effort, not just to be Era's father, but to prove to Adai's that he wasn't the same man who had abandoned them all those years ago. One afternoon, as they sat in the park, watching Era run around with a group of her friends, Adai's turned to Ji-hoon. You're doing okay, she said, the words coming out before she could stop them. He raised an eyebrow, a slight smile tugging at the corners of his lips. What do you mean by that? Adai's chuckled softly. I mean, you're not messing it up. You're actually trying. And that counts for something. Ji-hoon's smile widened, and for the first time in years, Adai's felt a warmth that wasn't tied to past regrets or unfinished business. It was simple, honest, and real. I won't mess this up, Ji-hoon said, his voice steady. Not again. As the days passed, their lives became a new chapter, one that wasn't dictated by the mistakes of the past, but by the hope that they could create something better for Era. A new kind of family, forged not out of perfection, but out of the willingness to try, to forgive, and to love. They weren't sure what the future would bring, but for the first time in a long time, they were ready to face it together. And as Era grew older, she began to understand the complexities of the world around her, the pain and the healing, the mistakes and the redemption. But above all, she learned that family wasn't just about blood. It was about those who showed up, who chose to be there, who proved that love could endure, even in the face of past wounds. One evening, as the three of them sat down to dinner, laughing and sharing stories, Adai's realized that this was what she had always wanted. Not perfection, but the chance to rebuild. The chance to finally have the family they deserved. And as Ji-hoon looked across the table at them, at Adai's and Era, he knew that he had found something far more precious than success or wealth. He had found the love that had always eluded him, the one thing that no amount of money or power could ever replace. For the first time, Ji-hoon felt whole.